Chapter 18. Two things happen at the exact same time, feeding each other. America becomes a nation of cities, and America absorbs the largest wave of immigration it had ever seen. Not separate stories, same story told from two directions, and neither one makes sense without the other. Between the Civil War and 1914, the country's population quadruples. The urban population multiplies 7 times over. And by 1910, 1 in 3 Americans is either foreign-born or has a foreign-born parent. You cannot understand the American city in this era without understanding who built it, block by block, and who was actively hostile to the people building it, often at the exact same time in the exact same city. 4 things today. 1. The new immigration, who is arriving, and the nativist backlash that meets them. 2. How cities physically grew, the technology that made them possible, and the tenements that made them dangerous. 3. Who actually ran these cities day to day, and it usually wasn't the mayor. 4. What all of this adds up to, and what you need for your exam. Let's get into it. Start with who is arriving and how that changes. Earlier in the century, immigration skewed Northern and Western European, Britain, Germany, Scandinavia. Starting around the 1880s, the numbers flip. This so-called new immigration is Italian, Jewish, Polish, Slavic, Greek, along with Chinese and Mexican arrivals settling mainly in the West. Same journey across an ocean or a border, wildly different reception waiting on the other end. Why do they come? Push factors, overcrowded farmland back home, religious persecution, mandatory military conscription, economic collapse. Pull factors, American industrial jobs, and letters from relatives already here describing real opportunity. That combination produces chain migration. One family member arrives, gets a foothold, sends for the next, and the next after that. It is why entire villages from Sicily or Poland essentially reassemble themselves inside a single New York City block. Immigrants cluster into ethnic enclaves, Little Italy, Chinatown, the Lower East Side's Jewish quarter, partly for community, and partly because that is genuinely where the jobs and support networks already were. By 1910, foreign-born residents and their children make up more than 3/4 of the population in cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit. These enclaves functioned almost like transplanted villages, with their own newspapers, mutual aid societies, and houses of worship, which let new arrivals survive the transition without abandoning who they were. Point of entry depended entirely on where you were from. European immigrants mostly came through Ellis Island in New York Harbor, inspected and usually admitted within hours or days, standing beneath a statue inscribed with Emma Lazarus' line about the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Chinese immigrants, thanks to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, went through Angel Island in San Francisco Bay instead, detained for months, sometimes years, forced to prove their legal right to even be here. Same ocean, essentially, radically different welcome, written directly into federal law. And the backlash organizes fast and formally. The American Protective Association forms in 1887 specifically to fight Catholic immigration. In 1893, a group of Harvard graduates founds the Immigration Restriction League, pushing a literacy test to keep out anyone who couldn't read in their own language, a policy explicitly designed to filter out Southern and Eastern Europeans who had lower literacy rates than earlier arrivals. Some of this hostility even dresses itself up as science. Eugenics, the theory that you improve a population through selective breeding, gains real traction among the educated elite here, justifying forced sterilization and marriage restriction as supposedly rational modern policy. It wasn't rational, it wasn't modern, it was old prejudice wearing a new diploma. Meanwhile, cities are pulling in people from everywhere, not just overseas. Rural Americans leave the farm for the city's better pay, and honestly, the city's better entertainment. Mechanized agriculture also just needs fewer hands to work the same acreage, so staying home stops making economic sense. Black Americans begin leaving the rural South for cities too, both South and North, seeking opportunity and some distance from Jim Crow, early ripples of what becomes the Great Migration, a movement that explodes into the millions once World War I opens up northern factory jobs. The numbers are staggering. In 1870, 1 in 5 Americans lived in a city of at least 8,000 people. By 1900, that is 1 in 3. Denver goes from 4,700 residents to over 100,000 in 20 years. Los Angeles grows nearly 5-fold in that same stretch, and by 1900, Chicago alone has crossed 1 million residents, a city that barely existed a lifetime earlier. Technology makes this vertical, sprawling city physically possible. Structural steel and the electric elevator let buildings finally climb instead of just spreading out. That is how Chicago and New York get their skylines. Electric streetcars extend a city's reach outward too, which is genuinely the birth of the American suburb. Workers can now live miles from the factory floor and commute in every morning instead of walking to a job next door. But zoom into the tenement buildings where most working immigrants actually lived, and the picture turns bleak fast. Danish immigrant journalist Jacob Riis documented it in 1890 in How the Other Half Lives. Buildings packed so tightly, one city block could house 4,000 people. Families crammed into airless rooms, panting for air and sleep in the July heat, as he put it. Faulty sewage systems dumped straight into the same rivers that supplied drinking water. The result, recurring epidemics, cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis. In 1890, almost 1 in 4 children born in American cities didn't survive to their first birthday. Work followed people straight home too. Clothing contractors turned tenement apartments into unregulated sweatshops, cram a few sewing machines into a family's living room, pay by the piece, skip every safety law on the books. Poverty and overcrowding drove up crime as well. The U.S. murder rate quadrupled between 1880 and 1900, even as crime rates in most European cities were falling over that same period. That's the actual math of the modern metropolis in this era. Skyscrapers and streetcars rising in the very same 20 years that a quarter of a city's infants were dying a few blocks away. Both of them, ultimately, built by the very same immigrant hands. So who was actually running these cities day to day? Officially, weak mayors and state legislatures that controlled city budgets from a distance. Practically, the political machine. At the head of a machine sat a boss, almost never holding much formal office himself, but running a tight network of ward representatives who handled the real, granular business of urban life. A coal delivery in winter, a job for your cousin, bail money if you got arrested, in exchange for votes and loyalty on election day. New York's Tammany Hall is the machine that defines the type. Under boss William Marcy Tweed in the 1860s and 70s, the machine looted the city outright. A courthouse budgeted at $250,000 ends up costing more than $13 million, most of it vanishing into contractors' and officials' pockets. Tweed goes to prison for it in 1873. His successor, George Washington Plunkett, offers something almost more revealing, a philosophical defense. Plunkett drew a careful line between what he called dishonest graft, Tweed's outright theft, and what he proudly called honest graft. If Plunkett heard, through his position, that the city was about to buy a particular piece of land, why shouldn't he buy it first, cheap, and sell it back at a markup? I seen my opportunities, he said, and I took them. Not exactly a legal defense, but an honest one in its own way. Out west, San Francisco's boss Abe Roof ran the same playbook, genuinely helpful to many immigrant communities and simultaneously convicted of bribery in 1908. Machines weren't charities pretending to be politics, they were power operations that happened to look like charity sometimes. They collected protection money from legal and illegal businesses alike, padded voter rolls with names pulled off tombstones, the so-called graveyard vote, and weren't shy about dumping a ballot box in the river if an election got close. So why did working-class immigrants keep voting these men back into power anyway? Because the machine was often the only functioning safety net they had. No city welfare department was coming to help a family evicted in January, but a ward boss might. Middle-class reformers pushed a very different fix, merit-based civil service, culminating in the 1883 Pendleton Act, hiring by exam instead of political connections. Good policy on paper, but these reformers mostly wanted to manage immigrants from a comfortable distance, waiting for them to properly assimilate. A smaller group, the settlement house movement, took the opposite approach and moved directly into the neighborhoods instead, offering childcare and English classes in person. Different tactic, same underlying gap the machine and the government both left wide open. So here's chapter 18 for your exam. Two forces define this era, and they were the same force wearing different clothes. An unprecedented wave of immigration reshaping who counted as American, and an unprecedented wave of urbanization reshaping where and how Americans lived. Both were met at every turn with resistance from people determined to control them. Nativists gatekeeping who got in, political bosses gatekeeping who got help, middle-class reformers gatekeeping what counted as proper American behavior. Know your key terms cold: chain migration, ethnic enclaves, nativism, eugenics, tenements, political machine, honest graft. And know the contrast pairs, because that's exactly what your Achieve assignment and exam questions are going to test. Ellis Island versus Angel Island, Boss Tweed's dishonest graft versus Plunkett's honest graft, machine politics versus civil service reform versus settlement houses. If you can explain why each pair existed side by side instead of one simply replacing the other, you understand this chapter. Lock in the dates too: 1882, Chinese exclusion; 1883, the Pendleton Act; 1890, Riis publishes his book; 1908, Boss Roof convicted. Get those on a mental timeline before test day. And don't lose the human center of it under all that vocabulary. A family in a Lower East Side tenement working a sewing machine past midnight to make rent is living through the exact same 20 years that built the first skyscrapers and opened the first subway. Progress and misery going up side by side on purpose in the same city, sometimes on the same block. Get your Chapter 18 source response done in Canvas and be ready to talk through those contrast pairs. See you in Chapter 19.